Hi everyone, welcome. I'm going to do a quick intro to our panelists today. So we have Gabe, let's see if I can hear this. We have Gabe Zichermann here, who we're still trying to figure out how we know each other exactly, but apparently in a past life we do. But he's an author, entrepreneur, and public speaker who's best known for his work in gamification and is currently working on a new project about embracing failure called Failosophy. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's
okay,
perfect.
cool.
Thank you.
And we have Rania Svoronou.
Amazing.
Did I do a good job with that? Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
Rania is an associate design director at IBM Interactive Experience. She is an active speaker, guest lecturer, industry mentor, and at some of the world's best universities, and has been invited to judge and mentor at multiple hackathons and design events across Europe. Rania has won multiple awards recognizing her as one of the best in digital tech in the UK. She's made it at the top of the top 100 Women Tech UK 2018, and also on the drum list, top 50 under 30 2018, showcasing the highest achieving women making their mark in digital.
That was a long intro.
It was, but it's nice to know all your accolades, so welcome. I'm really excited to have you both here today for this conversation. I think diversity and inclusion is a hot topic overall in technology, except we often hear this conversation more around culture and building companies, and maybe a little bit less around product. It's probably like more the hidden aspect of the conversation. So today we're really hoping to have a conversation about people who are consciously thinking about inclusion in design and some of the challenges that they have and some of the practical considerations they deal with and some of the solutions they've come up with. So I'll just kick it off and talk about the conversation about diversity is always fraught with exactly what is diversity. So maybe we kick it off really with just a question about, what is it and how do you create products and design experiences that take that X diversity factor into consideration? I'll start with you, Gabe.
Yeah, so I think often, like when we talk about the subject of diversity in product design, we are conflating two different kind of things at the same time. So one issue is, how do we make sure that the product works for all different kinds of people who we expect to use the product, right? So that's one issue, and for every UX person, I think always the primary issue. Like, this is our target market. How do these people use this product? How do we ensure that this product works for them? Like we were talking about the color of this microphone, right? For Aina, it's not the right skin tone, right? So it really stands out on you. That's a very classic sense of like, oh, we need to bring more diverse thinking into this particular subject matter. But then we have all this other stuff around diversity, like neurodiversity, that lives just below that subject.
Yeah.
So people of different kind of psychological or neurological frames. So the most obvious one being autistic people. So autistic people use products differently, but it's not the same thing necessarily as designing for autistic people. And so we need to kind of like think of both of those things.
And Rania, for you, how do you think about diversity within your design work?
So for me, it all starts, especially when I'm working like in product designs, right, and product teams. It always starts like if we're building a diverse team, for me it starts there. We need to start building diverse design and development teams, right? Because if we think about it, when we're creating a product, right, or a project, we're not just assigning resources. We should start saying that we're actually framing our approach to the problem. So the more diverse the team, the more different angles and perspectives you're going to have. So that's how you're going to emerge in a breakthrough idea. That's how it happens. And that is tricky, of course, because it requires actions and from the team leaders, the product leads, and from the team members of embracing that, because embracing conflicts, which is not an easy thing to do. So for me, it's really going back and making sure we're hiring the right people and we're creating those diverse teams.
Can I just throw in an example of that occurs to me? So my last startup was a company called Onward. We were trying to help people with their technology-based addictions and built a product that used AI to help you deal with your tech addictions. Okay, so the first tech addiction that we chose to solve was porn addiction. Okay, that was our focus. Now, one of the interesting things, like myself, I'm a gay man entrepreneur. I was the CEO of the company and primary product guy, and we had a lot of gay men on the team while we were working on this product. And one of the things that gay people know is that porn and sex are not the same thing. We understand the difference between those two things. So when you're building a product to help people with a porn intervention, this is very specific, but when you're building a product to help people with a porn problem, you don't want to also block sites and apps and experiences that might help them have a meaningful, literal, physical interaction with other people. You know what I mean? Tinder and Tumblr serve different purposes for people in with that issue. And I don't think if we were primarily straight on our team, I'm not sure that would have been immediately obvious. But we knew that already from our own cultural experience.
Is there a hierarchy in terms of diversity, right? So you're building a product that might have a neurodiversity, you might have gender diversity, you might have other kinds of cultural diversity. Is there a hierarchy you think of? Because the question then becomes like, right, diversity is great, right? But where do you start, and how does one actually get into creating some sort of order of what you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts, again, I think it goes back to the people, right? Because people are designing for other people. So in terms of hierarchy, you wouldn't want to put something that it's more important than something else. So that is really important also of how you conduct research. I think it starts from there as well. So it's having the right principles. You know, we have also like the inclusion by design principles. So I think it's going back and framing the problem, trying to understand like, okay, who is the audience I'm designing for? And then evaluate what's the hierarchy, because it's going to be wrong to say this is more important over something else.
And the biggest paradox of all of that is that often the most dynamic product teams are born out of a shared problem that the people on that team are actually having. So they're experiencing a particular problem and they want to solve that particular problem. But if that team is of a particular group, so coming from one specific ethnic, gender, neurological, sexual identity background, then it can also blind you to the ways that the broader population might want to use that particular product. But you have to balance the two things off against each other, because if you get too diffuse, then you may not be able to solve the actual problem you're trying to solve.
So
it's hard.
Oh, go ahead first.
No, I was going to say that where it goes back to the whole KPIs, right? And how you measure the whole idea of, okay, what we're designing for.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that you might have a team, for example, that are like-minded or very much culturally or neurologically similar to you. This happens a lot. We know this from the data, right? We tend to recruit people who are like us and who we get along with and who we want to have beers with at the end of the day, right? And so let's assume that you are actually solving a problem for people who are generally speaking like that. When we dig deeper into all the other layers of diversity that we might want to, you might look the same on the outside, but you might be neurologically diverse on the inside, right? And it may not be something that's immediately evident. So then my question becomes, how does one take a team that may be limited, because you're not gonna have every form of diversity on your team, and have them think and challenge them to think about diversity in the work that they do?
Oh my God, that's so hard. Oh my God, that's really hard. Because people come with these, I'm sure you have a thought on that too, but people come with their perspective, and it's often very difficult for them to kind of put them, like be outside of their perspective. So the most common, I think the easiest example of this to me is how you pay for an Uber ride around the world, okay? So in the United States and Canada and most of the developed world, you don't have the option of paying for an Uber ride with cash. It's not an option. You must pay with a credit or debit card or some kind of account that you can tie. Uber, of course, recognizes that in other countries, like in India, they have to be able to take cash because the vast majority of people in the country might be unbanked and won't have a credit card or whatever. But here's the thing, like 40% of Americans are unbanked or underbanked. And they're not being represented, or they don't have an available solution with Uber in the United States. It's really like a perception thing. And you can maybe forgive the Uber team because like they're pretty rich compared to the bottom 40%, and they're living in San Francisco, and it's like, who doesn't have a credit card? But it's funny how companies can see that when it's international and not see it when it's a diverse like home country, that they're based in.
Any thoughts?
No, I was going to say, actually, that's a great example. It builds in the whole idea of that we are all unconsciously biased, right? And it all starts from there, really, because we are, like, from an evolutionary standpoint of view, so we are all unconsciously biased, and that's what leads to actually end up having those, like, design problems in products and experiences. So for me, is actually accepting the fact that we're all unconsciously biased, and embracing the fact and trying to change it, because, we're taught that it's bad from society, the whole word, bias. But it's more around start discussing around the topic, because we all come from different, cultural backgrounds and experiences, and start discussing it and say, you know what, I'm actually biased towards this. I've accepted that fact, and then really work on it. Because if you're unconsciously biased, that's how you end up having all those, problems and situations. So it's really going back as well to the people who are, designing for.
But I think it's difficult in a UX context because many times diverse populations, so diverse user populations, are unable to articulate the ways in which their requirements might be different from the general population's requirements. So, like, for example, if you were interviewing gay people about the design of something simple, like, let's say, an intake form or some kind of CRM product, right? I'm not sure that every gay person would be like, hey, wait a minute, actually, make sure you don't use gendered words for your spouse. Make sure you use a gender-neutral word for your spouse right away. They know it when they see it. So when you put the product out and it gives you the option of, and it would ask me, what's my gender, and then, what's my wife's name, right? Then I'll be like, oh, that's a problem. But in advance, I too live in a world that's biased against, different sexual backgrounds. So I'm not always conscious of that. And so this means that if you're going to do great inclusive UX design, I think you need to go one level deeper than just that. You have to really try to find people, bring them on your team who can think in this way, think ahead of that conflict. It's hard to stay ahead of it, I think.
So let's dive into cognitive biases, because this is something that I really want to get into. So let's, if either one of you want to just to define what we mean when we say cognitive bias, and then let's go into some of the common cognitive biases.
Sure, you want to go? Yeah, so cognitive bias is like a frame of reference for in my view, a frame of reference for interpreting the world around you that clouds your ability to see things in a holistic way. And often they're most extreme when you're not conscious of your cognitive bias. And so mostly they come from like the psychology of kind of less conscious thought about how you act in the world.
Common cognitive biases?
I would agree, actually. And just add is that we're all inherently basically biased, is going back to that, and just accepting the fact and really, try. Actually, there was a study from Boston University that find out that half of us have no idea how biased we are, right? And that we always think that the other person is more biased than us. Yeah. So that really creates this blind spot bubble of like, oh no, I'm not biased at all. So it's really, really,
well, I think we can see that in politics, right? Everyone else thinks the other side is wrong, but everyone is convinced that they're not biased against them, right?
So I often think about two biases when I think about great product design or entrepreneurship. So the first bias, and this applies to us, the creators, as much as it applies to people consuming our products, which is called expert bias, okay? So an expert bias, you go from your first level of expertise in a subject is unconscious incompetence. So that is, you don't know why, but you're not good at something. And the top level of performance in a given subject area is unconscious competence, or muscle memory is the other way of thinking about it. You're able to do the thing, but you don't really know how you're doing the thing. You're just good at the thing because you've been doing the thing for a long time. The problem with expert bias is that people in that upper quadrant, the unconsciously competent people, have a great deal of difficulty explaining to everybody else how they got from unconsciously incompetent to unconsciously competent. Yeah. They're the worst possible teachers, right? So the worst person to teach you how to drive is a Formula One race car driver. Is the way to think about that. Yeah. That's really the wrong place to go to learn how to drive. Yeah. And so when you're creating products, one of the things that I always encourage people to do is think about the ways in which the things that you just know and the things that you just feel, like how did you get to that point in your particular arc as a product person? what were the lessons that you learned, and break those down and make those transparent to other people who may not have that same experience. Because otherwise you may be blinded. You may be blinded by a lot of crap.
And I think a good sort of reference or a starting point is the Daniel Kahneman book about slow thinking. If you haven't already read it, I really recommend it because it really challenges you to slow down and not just click into the mode of doing what you are unconsciously doing without challenging it and making decisions that are based on your biases. So we agree that like everyone is biased in some way or another, right? And that there's this kind of long list of potential biases you might bring to your product design, to your creation of your product. So then let me ask you this. So if we assume that that's the case, and you're running a team or you're creating a product, and you know that you have a specific problem that you're solving, then how do you make a case on a business level for why it is you should A, take the time to focus on decoding those biases, and B, why it's important for the business to actually take this into consideration?
So I'll start by saying that we should watch diversity and inclusion as important as innovation. That's the first step, right? That those two go hand in hand, they should go hand in hand, and it's fundamental to any businesses and the success of a product. And there are numbers that showing this as well. So in terms of that, I would go back to what I mentioned in terms of the KPIs, for example. That's a really good example, right, of how we measure, for example, how the product is going, what do we want to improve, what are we going to improve in the user experience. So, but we should be really careful of not letting the data take over, but we should fight for meaningful KPIs, going back to your point. Because if we create those KPIs that actually show or that we're building for a more like diverse audience, then we have a good case of basically aligning, designing for like our users and the value for our business. So if those two align, then we have a better idea that we're actually on the right track.
I would say two things. So first of all, never underestimate the megalomania of a tech entrepreneur and play to that megalomania. So you want this product to be used by everybody in the whole world. You want everyone to use your product. That is actually pretty good at the highest levels of your organization, typically for selling ideas. And then the other way is I would sell with a little bit of fear and doubt. Like, oh, do you really want to piss off transgendered people right now with this product? Probably not, because we're going to get dragged on social media and nothing good can come of that as another sort of strategy. So certainly, I know that feels maybe like transactional a little bit, but it is important for some management to lay the threat out more clearly.
But is there any incentive though? Like, is there any, like, let's say positive incentive that you can give? Like, let's assume that the organization is not against the idea of investing time into, so because this is the thing, I think all these ideas are always great when we sit in a room and talk about them, about how we want to reach this height of being more diverse and more inclusive. But in my experience, what I discover is like, when the money hits like the job, then essentially what you get is a little bit of pullback. Well, we have to cut back here, we have to cut back there. Do we really need this inclusiveness? Do we really need, how about we just serve 2 out of the 10, potential groups that we could serve?
So I would say number one is stop thinking inclusive or inclusive design as a nice to have. Is a good starting point, right? And stop thinking that accessibility is just an add-on or extra work. Designers, let's start with that because I'm in the design space, should see it more as a design challenge that will have a real impact and not just something as an extra, right? We need to shift our mindsets. And another point is like human-centered design, right? Took the power back from the systems back to the humans, right? So human-centered design, everybody talks about it, we're designing, we talk about human-centered design, which is great, but that wasn't the case a while ago. So the next step is actually redefining the scope of and the assumption of what is human in human-centered design, right? So we can design for a broader audience. So I would say the next step is actually stop thinking as something extra and take it back that is part of the whole design process.
And I would bring you back to the original ideas behind the power of democratizing technology. So I know many people, most of our industry is working on stupid incremental projects. None of you in this room, but many of the projects that are being worked on are not very accretive to the human experience. But if you are motivated, if you have a vision for how your product or service can help people, then it's incumbent on you, it's important for you to stay focused on that, and making sure that you design in a way that is inclusive will allow people to get the maximum self-improvement out of the things you build.
So we have 20 seconds left. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to say, rate on a scale of 1 to 10. How are we doing on diversity and inclusion in the tech industry?
Oh my God, 0.
Rate it.
0. 0.
I'm
So
gonna
bad.
be more positive, say just 1, just because there is, so we're gonna have a better hope.
Still a long way to go.
Yeah, a long way to go.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.